60 Minutes, a second look. It's that new podcast that we were telling you about. It uses rare archival treasures to take listeners on a journey through the news magazine's vault.
And joining us this morning is host Seth Doane. Seth, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And you're right, it is juicy. It's incredible what's in these archives. His Secret Service agent number 9 was with JFK when he was killed, and he opened up to 60 Minutes. Mike Wallace really had what was pretty much a nervous breakdown on the air. And we go back and find him. He's now 92 years old. We go back and we say, what happened and how did life change? And he really says that 60 Minutes interview for him was a turning point. He realized how much help he needed, and he would go on to have a really interesting, you should listen to the podcast, I won't tell all of it, but a really interesting relationship with Mike Wallace through letters back and forth.
That is amazing. Now, you mentioned the archives. I mean, 60 Minutes, probably the longest running news magazine. What was it like having access to those archives? I mean, you must be like a kid in a candy store going through all that.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as a journalist, it's like a master class in journalism. You're going back and you're listening to all of these greats and their interviews. And one of the premise of the podcast is to really dive back in and see what's there, what's even more interesting today, perhaps with the passage of time. Interviews, like you mentioned in your intro, Taylor Swift, Leslie Stahl sat down with her for hours and hours, about 3 hours, incredible access back in 2011. A young Taylor Swift who was concerned about some things in her future looking forward. But the ultimate piece is only about 12, 14 minutes long. Usually that's how long a 60 Minutes piece is. So it's going back and saying, wow, what else is in these hours and hours in the vault that might be interesting for listeners?
Yeah, and obviously, with a podcast, you kind of get more of the gift of time, right? That you don't always get when you're doing, television or a visual medium. How did that factor into the podcast and what you're able to actually elaborate on?
Well, it's a pleasure. As a journalist, you're always constrained by time, and there's really the chance for interviews to go longer and to hear the little pauses that come up. And I've also found it interesting I've worked for CBS for 17 years, so I'm used to television. So now thinking from an audio perspective, describing those scenes, those folks sometimes smoking cigarettes during interviews. And it's been really interesting, not only specific, celebrities maybe, but going back to see themes and types of stories. We do a piece on book banning, and you look at a Morley Safer piece from 75, then a Mike Wallace piece, and then a piece from Scott Pelley in 2024, where you're looking at some of the same themes, some of the same issues over the decades.
Seth, before we let you go, I got to know, is there something that listeners might find most surprising in these interviews?
I think you'd be surprised at what hasn't aired and how much is really interesting. And sometimes that might be just that we see things a little bit different today in 2024 looking back. But some of the things you hear, I would urge you to go and listen wherever you find your podcast, search for 60 Minutes, a second look, and you'll be surprised at how did this stuff not make air in the first place.
Sounds incredible. Secret Service Agent number 9 is the most recent episode. Seth, thanks a lot for joining us.